student loan debt for a really long time. Now, even though I had debt in my 20s and 30s and 40s, I consider myself one of the lucky ones. And I think that tells you just how bad the crisis of student loan debt is for the 40 million people in America who have it. It's well been reported that student loan debt has topped $1 trillion. In fact, it's $1.2 trillion. It has exceeded all other consumer debt in the United States of America, save for mortgage debt. It's more than credit card debt. It's more than auto debt. And it's the only debt that increased during the Great Recession. That Great Recession of 2007. And if there are any Rush Limbaugh fans in the audience, the 2007 recession was not caused by the 2009 inauguration of President Barack Obama. Rapidly and exponentially. In 2000, student loan debt was $200 billion. In 2011, it topped $1 trillion. And today, in 2013, it is over $1.2 trillion. So how has higher education and technical college training, which were long vehicles to a middle-class life, become a multiple-decade debt sentence? Well, the average student loan in the state of Wisconsin for a four-year graduate, any guesses? $27,000. And at least 67% of students have student loan debt. But what does being saddled with thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt, possibly for decades after graduation, mean to individual households and mean to our economy? Well, my organizations, One Wisconsin Now and One Wisconsin Institute, we decided to check it out. Now, increasingly, students and their families have been unable to absorb the skyrocketing cost of tuition. Tuition which has grown by 500% on the average in just the last 20 years. And as more students were forced and their families were forced to take out more and more debt, the federal laws were changed at the behest of Wall Street and the big banks. And what they did was the big banks and Wall Street were able to strip every single consumer protection that is afforded a commercial transaction in the United States, specifically away from student loans. That includes an inability to refinance your loan, an inability to discharge your loan in bankruptcy, an inability to lose statutes of limitations on your student loan, and how an inability, you are allowed to circumvent state usury laws when it comes to student loans. Now, I know there are a lot of Bible readers out there, and I believe that usury is referenced in the Bible is not a good thing. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but there are 4 crimes currently which have no statute of limitations. They are kidnapping, murder, war crimes, and treason. And we have added student loan debt to that. Now, this spring, we conducted a web-based survey of 61,000 people across these United States. People had student loan debt. And we even, we did this and we said, like, how much is your student loan debt? We asked a bunch of personal questions about your finances, that sort of thing. We actually had to adjust our survey because we had topped off the amount of student loan debt you could have at $150,000. And we had at least a dozen people reach out to us and say, I've got more than that. Can you adjust your survey? So we had to do that. That is how bad student loan debt is out there. And the average reported monthly payment for graduates of a 4-year college, $499 a month. For almost 20 years. That's the length of their repayment. For 2-year college, for 2-year degrees, not much better. Average of $385 a month for 18 years. And when you think about those repayment limits for, say, technical college training of 18 years, remember that technical colleges in Wisconsin were free until 1972. So you see how out of control this madness is. Now, let me just say this. Student loan debt is a clear and present danger to the United States economy. And our research shows if you have a student loan debt, you're 2/3 more likely to purchase a used car instead of a new car. A home ownership, not much better. You're 2/3, if you have a student loan debt, 2 out of 3 people with student loan debt rent or live with their parents. And many of those will never be able to own that embodiment of middle class, the American dream, a home of their own. And if you think this doesn't have an impact on our economy, well, you're probably a lobbyist for the Wall Street banks trying to keep these laws in place. Now, we need real solutions.
So people thought it wouldn't happen. They said there's no way. She cannot win. And in fact, during the Republican convention last year, I was on a yacht with my friend John Nichols, where they were holding a fundraiser for Tommy. Tone deaf as they were, they held this fundraising event on a yacht. And there was a guy standing beside me as they were deriding Tammy Baldwin, and he whispered, "We're going to kick her ass, just like Karl Rove said." Well, Karl Rove had a bad year.
More than 1,400 in a chemical weapons attack just over 2 weeks ago. You know that I have always taken matters of war and peace very seriously, and I've always been a strong advocate of exhausting all other measures before going to war or using our military might. And I am proud of my record. I have served in the United States Congress under 3 presidents, and so far I have opposed a military action undertaken by each of them. Airstrikes in Kosovo under President Clinton, war in Iraq under the Bush administration, and use of military force in Libya during the Obama administration. I was one of the earliest opponents of the war in Iraq. As Congress considered authorization of the Iraq War, I posed a number of specific questions to President Bush, and he failed to answer them. I strongly opposed that war. Authorizing it was a tragic mistake, and we must never make that mistake again. I participated in classified briefings on Capitol Hill and at the White House, and I've heard the voices of thousands of Wisconsinites. The gravity of the issues before us are so significant, and they deserve a full debate. I support having that debate, and I'll be an active participant in it. President Obama's decision to come to Congress on this issue was the right one. We must demand that of all presidents, not just our current president, to come to Congress to get approval before taking military action against the population. There is reason why so many scholars and analysts have written that there are no good options in Syria. It's because there are no good options. The use of chemical weapons is a global atrocity and demands a global response. The various treaties and conventions addressing these issues have been ratified by most of the world's nations, and therefore, devising what will be a precedent-setting response to their violation demands that the world's nations engage in this discussion. America must not act alone. We must engage a larger, broader international community on this, and thus far I do not believe that that has happened. Now, this wouldn't be fighting BobFest if we didn't take a moment to ask WWBD, what would Bob do? So let me read a brief excerpt from Fighting Bob's floor speech on the eve of his vote on our entry into World War I, nearly a century ago. He starts with Mr. President, but he's addressing the President of the Senate, not the President of the United States. And he says, "I had supposed until recently that it was the duty of senators and representatives in Congress to vote and act according to their convictions on all public matters that came before them for consideration and decision. Quite another another doctrine has recently been pronounced by certain newspapers, which unfortunately seems to have the profound, considerable support elsewhere. And that is the doctrine of, quote, standing back of the president, without inquiring the president whether the president is right or wrong. For myself, I have never subscribed to that doctrine and never shall. I shall support the president in measures he proposes when I believe them to be right. And I shall oppose measures proposed by the president when I believe them to be wrong. The fact of the matter which the president submits for consideration is of the greatest importance is only additional reason why we should be sure we are right and not be swerved from that conviction or intimidating in its expression in any influence of its power whatsoever. He goes on to say, it is important for us to speak and vote our convictions in matters of internal policy, though we may unfortunately be in disagreement with this president. It is infinitely more important for us to speak and vote our convictions when the question is one of war and peace, certain to involve the lives and fortunes of many of our people, and it may be the destiny of all of them and of the civilized world as well. If, unhappily, on such momentous questions, the most patient research and conscientious consideration we could give them leave us in disagreement with the president, I know no course to take except to oppose, regretfully, but not less firmly, the demands of the executive. Albeit a century ago, Bob always has some good counsel. Now I want you to know that I have heard your voices. I share your concerns. And this is an issue that deserves deep, deep consideration and thorough review. And I will continue to ask those tough questions. I will continue to press for answers.
So now I will add that not only have I heard your voices and listened to your concerns, I've seen you visibly express this opinion.
160.
More than aware of the discussions that are taking place in Washington about a war with Syria. And let me just say this about war. And let me just say this about aggressive action. I believe in war and aggressive action, and the time is long overdue that we declared war against high unemployment in this country and that we created the millions of jobs that this nation needs. Now, wouldn't it be a great thing if all of the media and all of the political leaders of this country were focused on how we create millions of jobs, how we rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, how we deal with the reality that real unemployment in this country is not 7.4%, but almost 14%, that youth unemployment, our entire generation of young people, high school grads, college grads, unemployment for them is close to 18%, black unemployment for kids, young black kids, close to 40%. Let us declare war against unemployment, create millions of jobs in this country. And if we're going to go to war, let's declare war and defeat the trend toward a collapsing middle class. Against young people in Wisconsin and Vermont and all over this country who are working for $7, $8, $9 an hour. Let's raise the minimum wage to a living wage. How's that for a good war? You want another war that will rally the American people? How about ending the national disgrace that the United States remains the only country in the industrialized world that does not guarantee health care for all people and for life? How about a war for a single-payer national health care system? Now, you really want a war, if you're really hungry for war, you really want to be aggressive. How about a war that ends the trend in this country toward an oligarchic form of society, with a handful of billionaires, control the economy and the political life of this country? Now, how about a war to fulfill the dreams of the American people and creating an egalitarian form of society rather than one in which the top 1% owns 38% of the wealth in America, while the bottom 60% owns 2.3%. You want a war? Let's declare war against oligarchy and go to war. What about a war against Wall Street and their greed? Today, the top 6 financial institutions in this country have assets of over $9 trillion, which is equivalent to 2/3 of the GDP of the United States of America. They write 2/3 of the credit cards and issue half of the mortgages in America. And after their greed, their recklessness, and their illegal behavior drove this country into the worst economic downfall since the Great Depression. You'll all be delighted to know that after you bail them out, they're now enjoying record-breaking profits. Now, how about breaking up the major financial institutions in this country? regulating Wall Street. Let me tell you, I am a United States Senator. That ain't the way it works. Wall Street regulates the Congress. Now, how about another war to save the planet and address the planetary crisis of global warming? How about standing up to the oil companies and the coal companies and telling them that we have got to transform our energy system, and when we do that, and when we move to energy efficiency, new forms of transportation, wind, solar, geothermal, biomass, not only can we cut greenhouse gas emissions, lead the world in combating global warming, we can create millions of jobs doing that. How about that, war? And here's another war that I think we should fight. People fought and died in this country for democracy. And in my state of Vermont, at our town meetings, hold in March, what democracy means is one person, one vote. That's what it means. It does not mean a handful of billionaires controlling the political process in this country. How about a war to overturn this disastrous Supreme Court decision on Citizens United and move to public Let me say a brief word on Syria. And I know that all of you agree with me. In Syria now, we have a thug running that country who has made billions on the backs of his people, and recently has waged chemical warfare against his own people. But let me tell you something about foreign policy and wars. I am old enough to remember Vietnam, and I remember like it was yesterday, Henry Kissinger standing in front of charts and maps telling us that if Vietnam fell, there would be a domino impact which would influence the entire world. Well, Vietnam fell. Right now, American corporations, after having shut down 50,000 factories in America over the last dozen years, are now investing $10 billion a year in Vietnam, where the average wage is $1 an hour. What they told us about Vietnam was wrong. I remember Afghanistan, a country which virtually did not have an army. That was going to be an easy conquest. 11 years later, we are still in Afghanistan, in the longest war in the history of the United States of America. And I remember Iraq, the war I voted against. And I remember President Bush standing talking about mission accomplished. And after 4,600 men and women were dead, the chairman of the Veterans Committee, I can tell you what I think most of you know. We have tens of thousands of good, decent men and women back here in the United States today who are suffering with traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder. We're trying to figure out how we deal with those issues. That was Iraq, which was, as I recall, a slam dunk, no problem. Point is that war has unintended consequences. The point is that when you get into a bloody and complicated civil war in Syria, it is going to be, in my view, pretty hard to get out of that war. Now, I know that For progressives in Wisconsin and Vermont and all over this country, these are difficult times. These are painful times. I think a lot of people are disappointed with the actions coming from the White House, whether it's this effort or the war in Syria, whether it's the NSA and the other invasions of privacy, whether it is not standing up to right-wing Republican extremism. And I think that disappointment stretches all across this country.